be able to join us. If he can, he'll just pop in. If not, then you've got me. So I'm Tim Peake, and delighted to be with you this morning. So again, sorry for the delay. Jeremy and I were going to have a chat this morning, a little bit about space, about isolation. Really delighted to have your input as well to it. So I can already see some comments coming in on the YouTube channel. So please do feel free to type in your questions and comments, because I can see all of that. And as I go through, I'll be delighted to answer some. I've also got Tom from the UK Space Agency. You can't hear him or see him, but he'll be helping me with some of those questions as well. So firstly, isolation, how are you doing? It's tough. I know we've been in lockdown for a number of weeks now. What I'm finding is really helping me and my family is following a structure, following a routine. I'm sure all of you are homeschooling, and that helps as well, keeping some form of normality. But even when you're not homeschooling, even at the weekends, keeping some sort of structure and routine, doing things like exercising every day. Even if you can't get outside, then doing something, in your bedroom or in your living room, something to keep you fit and healthy. And physical body, being physically fit means being mentally fit too. We know that on board the space station, we have to exercise for about 2.5 hours every day. Now, the main reason we exercise in space is actually to keep our muscles and our bones in a good, fit, healthy condition. Because if we didn't do that, then they would start to degrade, to wear away. We call it atrophy, because it's actually gravity here on Earth that actually keeps building that bone and building our muscles and keeping us strong. So whilst we do that on board the space station, actually the side effect of the benefits of exercise is our mental well-being. For me, certainly, I would jump on the treadmill, I would jump on the bike machine, and I was able to listen to some music, just switch off from the busy schedule on board the space station. And it really just helps you unwind and relax in a stressful environment. So hopefully you'll be feeling the same as well. If you can manage to do a little bit of exercise every day, you'll feel all of those benefits. And also having fun is important. We're all locked away. We're not able to do the things that we used to do all the time. So try and give yourself a hobby or a fun activity, something you look forward to every day that can help break up your schedule. For me, it could be as simple as taking a coffee break or a tea break in the morning and the afternoon. And what I would do with my tea break every time was just go to the cupola window and look out. Because when you're in space, of course, the most magnificent thing is to be able to look down at planet Earth and enjoy the view. And it wasn't necessarily the most productive use of an astronaut's time, but it was my time, it was my choice, and that's what I wanted to do. And again, just 5 minutes of taking a break from my schedule was enough to kind of reset the routine and then be able to go back to work and work effectively. Now, Jeremy and I were going to talk a little bit about isolation and how we cope with that. Now, as astronauts, we have the advantage of being selected, partly because the space agencies know that we have the right psychological profile that suits isolation. So when we go through that year-long selection process to try and become astronauts, the agencies are looking to see if we're the kind of character that can work well in a small team, in a confined environment under stressful conditions. And they're picking the people that they think will be most suited to working in that environment. Obviously, we're all now under lockdown. We're all working in isolation, and we haven't all had the benefit of that selection process. But there are also things you can do to train, to try and make you better at dealing with isolation. And one of the great environments that we use for astronaut training is in a cave. Probably one of the most fun aspects of training. Caves are brilliant for putting you under pressure and stress, psychological pressure and also physical pressure. Because when you're down in a cave, and the cave networks that we were using in Sardinia, these were 3 or 4 kilometers down, very, very deep into caves, where we'd set up our base camp and then we'd go exploring even further. It took about a day and a half just to get to the base camp. Lots of technical rope work, climbing and descending. So there's an element of risk there. You're isolated, you have no idea of what time it is, because the instructors can take your watches away from you. So you're deprived of your senses. Very dim light all the time. You can't really smell anything down in a cave. It's constant temperature, very, very humid environment. And so very quickly, very easily, you can, feel under stress and pressure, both physically and psychologically. And on top of that, of course, you can make people feel really uncomfortable in a cave. You can make them cold. You can make them wet. You can make them tired. You can make them hungry. And I'm sure everybody knows we all get a bit tetchy when we get tired and hungry and cold and wet. And when you're not feeling at your greatest, that's when you get clashes of personality. And so in a cave environment, of course, our instructors are trying to do that. They're trying to almost get clashes of personality. They're trying to push us to our limits so that we can understand how we feel when we're under pressure. And we can also see how our crewmates, how our colleagues, what they look like, what they feel like when they're under pressure. And that really helps. It's a good environment for being able to come out of that, talk to each other and say, well, what were you finding difficult? This is what I was finding difficult. And building on that, building strengths and ways of how to cope with those kind of stressful conditions. So caves, I think, are brilliant training ground for isolation. Now, another area where we go into isolation is just prior to launch. We have to put ourselves in quarantine for very much the same reasons that we are all in quarantine now. We do not want to take any virus onto the International Space Station. And so that period of about 12 to 14 days when we're down in Baikonur in Kazakhstan, we're waiting to launch into space. It's actually a period which is in some ways quite nice because we've been so busy with our training schedule. That 2 weeks is a chance to relax, to just focus on the mission ahead, to wrap up any final details of admin that you might need to do, and to prepare ourselves for the launch that's coming up. On the downside, of course, it means that we're isolated from our family and our loved ones. We're normally able to see our partners, but everybody else, including children, we have to stay away from, and we're only allowed to see them behind glass. So for me as a father, that was particularly difficult. I've got 2 young boys, and I had to say goodbye to them 2 weeks before I actually left Earth for space. And it's very hard for young children to understand that. They can see me as daddy, but they can't actually touch me or hug me. We've said our goodbyes and that's it. So dealing with quarantine is also a difficult position, but it's very, very important that we don't take these viruses on board the space station. You can imagine if one crew member had coronavirus, for example, all crew members are extremely likely to get it. And in space, we do have a very, very good medical cabinet, and we're all trained to a very, very high level of first aid. And we do have support from our flight surgeons back in mission control. But it would still be very difficult to deal with that kind of outbreak on board the International Space Station. Now, somebody was asking me about Mars and how would I feel about a trip to Mars and the levels of isolation that you'll deal with there. Now, I mean, that's incredible. If you think about what we are doing right now on the space station, we've got 3 people in space right now, living in space for 6 months to a year at a time. But this mission to Mars is going to be a 3-year mission. It's a completely different ballgame. At the moment, it takes around about 8 months to get to Mars. But Mars and Earth only align once every 2 years because Earth is closer to the sun. And so Earth is rotating around the sun faster than Mars. So when Mars and Earth are together over here, Earth goes on its way on the inside orbit and Mars is much, much slower. And then 2 years later, they line back up again. So these launch windows only come around once every 2 years. That's why we were really hoping this summer, we've got one of those periods where Earth and Mars are aligned, and we were hoping to launch a European Mars rover this summer. Now, unfortunately, that's been delayed. And so we can't just delay it 3 months or 4 months. We have to delay it 2 years because that's the next time the launch window comes. So if you're an astronaut, if you want to be an astronaut, and people watching this today, probably exactly the right age for being the first astronaut to go to Mars, it's going to be a long journey. Some of the things we're working on is to try and get better propulsion techniques, so better rocket engines that can accelerate us faster and then slow us down. There's no point in having a rocket engine that just goes hurtling off to Mars without actually slowing you down, because you can't come into the Martian atmosphere going 50 times the speed of sound. You need to be able to slow down to make a safe landing on Mars. So we need better engines to get us there more quickly. But the levels of isolation are going to be quite significant. You imagine going away for 3 years away from your friends and family and loved ones. And also, watching planet Earth go from this beautiful large planet to just a speck of light, no different from any other star in the universe. You're going to really miss your home planet. You're not going to be able to do what I did, which is go to the cupola window and look out and then just see beautiful Earth. You're going to feel very remote, very isolated. We are looking at selecting new astronauts maybe later this year or early next year. And the really exciting thing is that these astronauts will be the ones who will definitely be taking us back to the moon, a return to the surface of the moon in the 2020s, mid-2020s to late 2020s, and potentially some of the first astronauts who will be taking those journeys to Mars. And that is going to require, again, a different set of characteristics and personality, the kind of people who will be able to cope with that extra level of isolation going onto Mars. So very exciting future coming up with moon exploration and Mars exploration. I think we might have Jeremy back with us. Jeremy, can you hear me? Okay. I can see you speaking, Jeremy. I can't hear you. Tom, can you hear Jeremy? Just can check if everyone else can hear him. Okay, Jeremy, I'm not hearing you. I'm going to keep on talking. Tom, jump in here. If you can hear Jeremy speaking, then let me know, and I'll keep quiet and let Jeremy talk. Until Jeremy comes back in again, let's have a little talk about spacewalking, because it's one thing being isolated on board the space station inside, a confined space. It's another thing altogether to go outside. And despite the fact you're outside, you might think that, wow, that feels very liberating, being outside the space station, like taking a walk in the fresh air, like leaving your house. But the reality is, of course, you're still inside your spacesuit. And if anything, you feel even more claustrophobic, more confined inside the spacesuit environment. It's like a small space station. But what is beautiful when you go out on a spacewalk is that you're able to move your body around much more freely, and you're just seeing the whole universe just through this thin visor. And that is quite unique and quite unbelievable. So on a spacewalk, of course, that for me is probably the best part of my mission. It was the absolute highlight of my mission. I spent about 4.5 hours with my NASA crewmate Tim Peake, and we had to go and repair one of the solar panels at the very furthest edge of the space station. And we had a few minutes just to enjoy that incredible view of planet Earth, looking back at the stars. Now, something was going wrong with Tim Peake's suit, though. Even though we didn't really know it at the time, it happened very, very early on in the spacewalk, and that was a little bit of water just starting to leak into his helmet. And this is something that happened to my crewmate, my ESA crewmate, Luca Parmitano, a few years ago, back in 2013. He was on a spacewalk and his helmet started filling with water. And Mission Control thought, first of all, well, that water must be coming from your drink bag. Now, I've got something to show you here, because when we're on a spacewalk, this is the drink bag that we use. Okay, this is the real deal. You can see it's got Velcro pads here. That's so that we can stick this to the inside of our spacesuit. And if I stand up, it would actually be like this on my chest. It's stuck here on the inside of the spacesuit. And this nozzle, we design it so that it just pokes inside the helmet and it's off there. And we could just sort of move our mouth over and take a drink. So during the spacewalk, we're drinking from this pouch here. I've actually got Flat Tim to help me with this. Look, here we go.
Is that the one you actually took into space, Tim?
Ah, Jeremy, I can hear you now.
Sorry about that. More technical difficulties. Is that the one you actually took into space?
This is a training one. Okay, so here's Flat Tim. This is where that pouch would sit, just there, and you've got this blue, mouthpiece that goes there, and we can actually take our drink. That's how it works. But it wasn't the drink pouch. Luca actually drank everything. He just guzzled this down, got rid of all the water, and thought, okay, that's it, the leak will stop. But the water kept on coming into the helmet, and of course the leak was coming from a different part of the spacesuit. And the thing about water is that we don't realize down here on Earth, we don't realize how sticky water is. But when you're in space, you can really see the surface tension of water. It just forms a ball, and it all sticks together. And actually, if you put your hand into water, it's very gloopy, and it almost feels, like it's like a glue sticking it together. And that's the surface tension of the water. It sticks to your hand. And worse, when you're in a spacesuit, if water comes over your face, it loves to stick into eye sockets. And the water came over Luca's face. It was in his eyes, around his nose, and he was starting to worry that he was going to drown in space. So thankfully, we were able to get Luca back in very quickly and avoid a disaster there. But the same thing was happening on my spacewalk with Tim Copra. So we realized we had to do the same, get Tim Copra inside very quickly, and thankfully we did that.
But we know about surface tension from school, and it's a tiny, tiny effect. So how can it be so serious in space?
It's magnified because without gravity to actually kind of break up that surface tension and keep the water running in one direction, then it just, you get this ball of water, and a very small volume of water is enough to actually make somebody drown. It doesn't take much to get water into the lungs and then to cause a drowning effect. So it's a very small quantity of water can be very dangerous if it gets in around your mouth and nose.
Now, we've got loads and loads of questions coming in, so we have to try and fit a few of them in. So there's a question from Tristan and Donna. There's a live questions come in this morning. How long does it take to get ready to go out on a spacewalk?
Spacewalking takes the entire day. It's a really long, busy day, and we get up normally about 5:30 in the morning on spacewalk morning. The first thing we'll do is actually start getting our medical harness fixed up. So we have to put our chest harness on there. That's going to help mission control monitor our breathing and our heart rate during the spacewalk. Then we actually start going into the airlock and start breathing oxygen right away. We put on a mask, and what we're trying to do here is breathe 100% oxygen to flush the nitrogen out of our bodies. Here in a normal atmosphere, we've got about 78% of the air we're breathing in right now is nitrogen. And nitrogen's an inert gas. It doesn't do anything for us, but our body does absorb it. And the problem is that nitrogen can then cause bubbles, a bit like diving, if we go into a low pressure environment. And in space, that's exactly what we're doing. When we go into our spacesuits, we're taking the pressure down in our spacesuits as low as we safely can. And if we had a lot of nitrogen in our blood, it would bubble, and potentially those bubbles could go to your bones, causing pain, tingling, and in worst case scenarios, the bubbles could go to our heart or to our brain, causing much more serious effects. So by breathing oxygen for a couple of hours before a spacewalk, we're flushing the nitrogen out of our body. Then we have to put on the whole full spacesuit, and then we have to start depressurizing the airlock and getting all our tools, equipment ready. So we've been in the spacesuit for about 5 hours before we even go out and start our spacewalk. It's a long day.
Goodness me. So you have to be very fit to do this. How do you stay fit in space? I mean, we've got lots of questions coming in about this. So there's one from Toby and, sorry, I can't read the name here in my own writing, Rosin, I think. So how much exercise did you have to do in space, and what sort of exercises did you do?
Well, the favorite exercise for me was actually running or the bike machine, because I was able to actually listen to a podcast or watch a bit of television at the same time as exercising. So I was really able to switch off, and I enjoyed that. We also have this thing called ARED, which is a weightlifting device. Now, it's a bit like a multi-gym, but of course, no point taking weights into weightlessness. It's not going to have any effect. So our multi-gym uses vacuum cylinders, and we're pushing up on this bar, whether we're doing, you know, a shoulder press or bicep curl. We're actually exercising against the vacuum cylinders. That's what provides us with the resistance to keep ourselves fit and healthy.
That's brilliant. Now, I see the picture we've got up is of you running the London Marathon. There's a question came in from, if I can just find the right question, asking about whether you prefer to do the London Marathon in space or on the Earth. This is from Zach, who's 9.
Yeah, you know what? I thought it was going to be easier in space because we use this bungee system. You can just see it there on the picture to strap us to the treadmill. But that bungee can only generate about 70% of our body weight. So you would think that your legs are having an easier time. You know, they're only having to run with 70% body weight. The reality is all of that body weight is on these 2 points of your collarbone. And there's an awful lot of blood that needs to travel through that area down to your arms. And with all of that pressure on your shoulders, you know, the circulation to my fingers got very, very low. They were tingling. It was very painful. And your shoulders are very painful too. So we're only really meant to run on the treadmill for about 30 minutes at a time, not for 3.5 hours. So I think running it here on Earth is probably easier.
Well, there's lots more we could talk about that. But while you were in space, you were an ambassador for our Mission X program. This is Mission X, Train Like an Astronaut. So if anybody watching this fancies to go at some of the exercises and things that astronauts have to do to become fit, and also there's exercises to do with science and food and so on. So if anybody's interested, there's the details about how to join in with Mission X. It's really good for the whole family, but particularly for 8 to 12-year-olds. So we've got 40,000 people already taking part in this country. So do join in if you're interested at home in doing that. Okay, so we've seen a little bit about what you have to do to be an astronaut, you know, what sort of training and how you have to cope with confinement, being fit and so on. A lot of people want to know if you have to be really clever to be an astronaut. Were you a star pupil at school?
Okay, no, you don't. Now, let's talk about this because it is important. People learn at different rates. I wasn't a star pupil at school at all. I did work exceptionally hard, though. I put in a lot of effort, and I was always passionate about what I did. But my grades didn't really, you know, reflect any academic genius. I got 3 A levels in maths, physics, and chemistry, and I got a C, D, and an E. So not the highest that you would imagine in the class. The reality is, though, ever since I left school, I have never stopped studying. But I've been studying things that I've been passionate about. I love flying. Now, if you want to know about flying, if you really want to understand flying, you have to know a lot about physics. And then if you want to be a test pilot and get into even more detail about how and why aircraft fly, you need to understand a lot about maths. So I ended up going back to school in my 30s. I got a degree in flight dynamics, and I worked hard there. So there's always time to catch up. But I think what's really important is to try and work as hard as you can at what you enjoy. Try and find out what it is that sparks that passion, sparks that interest, and then really stick at it, be determined, and be as good as you can be at it. You know, if somebody else is better than you, then think, well, hang on a sec, why are they better than me? I'm going to be better than them. I'm going to find out more. I'm going to learn more.
There's a group of kids at the Archbishop Rowan Williams Primary School in Wales who are doing a project on space, and they'd love to know what subjects you had to do at school to become an astronaut. Now, I think you probably touched on that a bit, but
yeah, it doesn't really matter. And that's why it's another thing is, you know, if anyone's at school and worried about this, though, it's so important to really focus on what it is that you want to do, what you enjoy and what you like doing, rather than thinking about what I should do. What does somebody else want me to do? You know, it's more important to be finding out what it is that makes you tick and what's going to be your driving passion. We have astronauts who have come from a background as medical doctors, as engineers, as school teachers, as scientists. And in the future, that's going to become even broader, more diverse. So, you know, it's very difficult to say what you should be studying at school to become an astronaut. You can study anything. And in some respects, in my case, even, it was what I did after school that had more of an impact and more of an influence on me being selected, as in getting my degree later in life and becoming a test pilot. So I think the main part there is, you know, use that time at school to try different things and to work out what it is that you want to do, what you enjoy doing.
That sounds like brilliant advice. So we've always focused on the astronaut themselves, but there's loads of other people who work with you who have exciting jobs too. There's a really good question here from Amelia, who's 10, who'd like to know who helped you the most over the years preparing to be an astronaut and how. So I think it's a chance to talk about some of the other jobs other than being an astronaut that frankly are probably just as exciting, but we never hear about.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we are so privileged as astronauts to work with amazing people who are at the top of their game, whether it's the flight surgeons that are looking after us, whether it's the engineers who are making the kit and equipment that keeps us alive, you know, talking to the people who design spacesuits, who design life support systems. They know how to clean our atmosphere. They know how to recycle our water. And all these kind of people are brilliant. The scientists who are using space to do amazing things. So it's a very privileged position to be working with these people. And you kind of touched on a bit there as the, you know, people who I've met along my career path as well who have helped me. And I've been very lucky to have some brilliant school teachers who invested a lot of time and effort in me. Also extracurricular activities, scout leaders, combined cadet force leaders, doing, you know, giving up their weekends and their time to provide this outlet for young people to go and explore and have adventures and to learn more about themselves. Academics is very important, but it's only one part of the jigsaw puzzle, you know, and equally, if not more important part is your character, your personality, and those kind of things are developed when you're outside having adventures. So there's been lots of people who have helped me along the way with that as well.
So there's loads and loads of other jobs outside the human spaceflight program. Do you want to say a few words about the wider opportunities for people to work in space?
Well, absolutely. And, you know, something I'm looking forward to with these sessions as we go on through the weeks is actually using this as an opportunity to talk to many other people from other sectors as well. And it's not just space. I mean, I'm very interested in engineering and technology. And when you look to the future, I do think that you'll be well placed if you do enjoy STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. Then many jobs in the future are going to need that as a sort of solid foundation. Yeah. Whether you're talking about where we're moving with computer technology, with artificial intelligence, driverless vehicles, drone technologies, for example, you know, these are all jobs in the future, which we're going to need to understand. We're going to need more people with a science, engineering, mathematical background to be able to do those kind of jobs. So again, that's why I kind of come back to trying to think about what it is that you enjoy doing and focus on that.
Absolutely. And I guess the thing to remember is that if you study science and technology at school or university, whatever, it never stops you doing everything else. It doesn't prevent you from doing arts or languages or whatever. But if you haven't done a bit of science at school, then it's really difficult to become, I don't know, an engineer, for example, later on. So that's really interesting. Now, we've done a lot of talking about you and what you've personally done, but what we haven't done is answer the question. Here's one from Erin, who's 6. A brilliant question, absolutely on the mark. She says, what did you do in the space station? So basically what she wants to know is, what was the point of it all? There's far more to it than going on spacewalks and trying to fix the thing when it goes wrong.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people who think that we're just floating around up there having a great time. I wish we were. I wish we were.
Well, a few people have said that. Yes.
Yeah, or do you not get bored? The reality is space station is a busy place. In fact, we really value our quiet time on the space station. There's not much of it. We do try and work a Monday to Friday schedule. We do about 12 hours a day, and we do try and have a bit more of a relaxed tempo at the weekends, just because you can't be working that hard for 6 months. You risk making mistakes. So we do try and relax a bit at the weekend. But of course, it's a scientific laboratory. What we've done in space is we've managed to, put a space station into orbit, which means it's in permanent free fall. It is falling to Earth under the influence of gravity, but it's traveling so fast that as the space station falls to Earth, its rate of falling matches the curvature of the Earth, and so it remains in a permanent orbit. So everything in space is weightless. It's not zero gravity. That's a misconception. There is gravity. We're falling under the influence of gravity, but we're in weightlessness. And as a scientist, if you can change a parameter like pressure or temperature or humidity, and you can monitor what that change results in, well, in space we've changed the gravity effectively by removing it. We've made things weightless, and so plants can grow differently. Everything, organisms can act differently. Metals can form differently. So whether we're doing material science, biological science, medical science, we're finding different results, and that is where we're getting the big impacts and the big benefits from spaceflight.
So a huge different range of things we can do there. There's much more specific questions coming in. We've got questions from Dylan, Holly, and Eddie, who want to know what the kinds of experiments you did in space were, and why space makes a good test environment, which you just touched on. Izzy wants to know what medical experiments you were part of. Now, I'm not going to let you answer that question because we're just about out of time. But let me assure you at home that we'll get onto those questions in future features with Tim. So if you want to do your own space activities at home, then we've got a fantastic collection of space-related activities. These are on the Space Education Office's website. Anybody can use them. They're designed to be used at home with families. So do have a look there. And I've got a specific question here from somebody called Harry, who is 7. And he wants to know what kind of plants you grow on the space station, and do they grow the same as they do on Earth? Now, in 2 weeks' time, on May the 18th, we're going to be talking about the amazing rocket science project. This was an experiment done by about 600,000 young people across the UK using seeds that Tim took into space. So if you were one of those people who took part in that experiment, find out the latest results. So we're going to have a science expert from a university who has just published a paper on the results of their experiments, and they fit pretty well with the experiments that were done by the schools at the time. If you weren't involved in that, this is your chance to share in some of the excitement and get your questions answered by the experts. So what I'm going to suggest now is that we invite you to join us in 2 weeks' time on the 18th of May at 11:30, when I promised my internet connection will be better than it was today. It couldn't really have been worse, and I do apologize for the messing around at the beginning there, but we're all living in unusual times and experimenting with broadcasting from home. Tim's obviously become very adept at that, so well done for picking up the baton and holding the fort for me, so I do apologize. But anyway, in the meantime, join us in 2 weeks' time for Tim Talks Space at 11:30 on the 18th of May. See you then.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thank you, everybody, for watching this morning.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.